Good morning and welcome to the formal announcement of the Sea Change Collective, an initiative of the Urban League of Louisiana. I'm Judy Reese-Morse, President and CEO. I am honored and proud to share with you and invite you to support what I believe to be transformative work on behalf of African Americans, Latinos, and Hispanics in the greater New Orleans region. What you'll hear in the next hour represents the framework of an 18-month planning period that is already underway to tackle what may seem impossible to some, closing the racial wealth gap. For those who aren't familiar with the wealth gap, what we mean is lessening and ultimately eliminating disparities and opportunity differentials that limit the human potential and economic contributions of people of color in the greater New Orleans region. Today, there is a sizable gap between the wealth held by whites and the wealth held by African Americans, Latinos, and Hispanics. Some may think of this as being a problem for those without wealth, but we know that it's actually a problem for those with wealth also. It's a problem for everyone, for our economy and for our future. The Urban League of Louisiana has been serving the community, promoting economic self-reliance, civil rights, and social justice since 1938 in the greater New Orleans area. In 2016, the Urban League expanded its footprint to include the entire state and has worked on programming, policy, and advocacy efforts in education, workforce, entrepreneurship, criminal justice reform, voting rights, health equity, and generational wealth, just to name a few. As we listen to and learn from residents across the state during our annual Listen and Learn tour and at our annual statewide policy conference, one of the top issues raised is closing the racial wealth gap. And as we study best practices and seek inspiration from others who are doing this work, we've made an important decision here at the Urban League to prioritize closing the racial wealth gap for the communities we serve, and to do it with our partners and allies. Today, we want to tell you what Sea Change is and how it came about for us, and who we're working with to bring about the change we want to see. We also want to recognize and celebrate the initial funders of this work and applaud our national advisors for lifting up the Sea Change Collective as they move in spaces across the country. Finally, and most importantly, we want to invite every single person, every single organization, every single business in the greater New Orleans region to join Sea Change in this work to close the racial wealth gap, to create an environment where everyone can build assets, prosper, and make our economy the strongest it has ever been. I'll start by defining Sea Change. Sea Change is a data-driven, community-oriented, outcomes-focused, collective impact initiative that is committed to identifying policy and practice solutions to close the racial wealth gap in the greater New Orleans region. Sea Change has 3 levers for change: income and wages, home ownership, and business ownership. Based on data, these 3 levers present the greatest opportunity for wealth creation if equity is being practiced. Sea Change is data-driven. It is not anecdotal or based on just one person's experience. It's community-oriented because qualitative data is just as important as quantitative data to us. It is outcomes-focused because if it doesn't lead to outcomes that produce change, then it won't deliver on the hopes and dreams of the people it represents. And it uses a collective impact model because we cannot do this work alone. And more importantly, we don't want to do it alone. It will take many of us coming together, working together, leveraging our access and resources to build the public will necessary to make the change that we want to see. And while the focus today is on the greater New Orleans region, the vision is that this work will take place in other regions across Louisiana. Did you know that by the year 2050, the metropolitan New Orleans area stands to realize a $3 billion gain in economic input if the racial equity gap is closed? That by the year 2050, more than half the population, workforce, and consumers in the 8-parish metropolitan New Orleans area will be people of color. And that by enabling the full creative and economic potential of everyone, we can experience an earnings gain in the billions and an increase in local and state revenue in the hundreds of millions, all by closing the racial wealth gap. So I say, let's close the racial wealth gap. But it all starts with the data. The Sea Change Collective's data partner is the Data Center, led by Executive Director Lamar Gardier. Lamar will walk us through some of the data points being used to frame Sea Change, how we arrived at the 3 levers of change, and why it's so important to understand the opportunities the data present. Good morning, Lamar.
Good morning, Judy, and thank you so much for this opportunity, and to Urban League and all the partners involved. Again, I'm Lamar Gardier, Executive Director of the Data Center. So data and research, as Judy said, have been at the heart of this effort. And that data suggests that issues like the racial wealth gap are at the heart of so many of the problems we see in New Orleans, but also across the country. But for as many problems as the wealth gap causes, there are that many or more contributing factors to it, and therefore ways to fix it. With Sea Change, we considered looking at big issue areas like education, criminal justice, health, even things like housing affordability, and even big events like hurricanes and pandemics, because all those things do contribute to a person's ability to build and hold wealth, but in somewhat indirect ways. So we stepped back, looked at the data, and asked ourselves, what are the basic questions that need to be asked about wealth? And they are, who has it, how do they hold it, and how do they accumulate it? These questions are actually fairly easy to answer here in America. There are many ways to hold wealth: stocks, bonds, retirement plans, liquid assets, things like that. But the most common way that people in America hold their wealth is in their homes. So the first strategy lever is home ownership. And there are many ways to accumulate wealth: inheritance, investments, great paying jobs, things like that. You can even get lucky and hit the lottery, but we wouldn't leave something like the wealth gap to chance, solving the wealth gap to chance. So we landed on income and wages as the most accessible way to build wealth, because everyone who works earns a wage. And business ownership as the best way to quickly accumulate wealth while also benefiting the broader economy. And we knew that it was important to focus these efforts at the metro level, since the economy doesn't stop at municipal borders. We also knew that these strategies needed to be focused on increasing wealth for African Americans, Hispanics, and Latinos, because that's where the disparities are. In order to do that, first of all, we have to work together. And if we do, the benefits accrue to everyone. In fact, we know that in order for our region to remain competitive, we need everyone to be performing at their utmost potential. And that means solving issues around economic inclusion. The numbers make it clear. 71% of Black households and 56% of Hispanic Latino households earn less than a living wage in New Orleans, compared to 31% of white households. And even though we can see very clearly there that Black households earn a less than a living wage at more than twice the rate of white households, there's room for improvement for everyone there. And so the strategies involved can benefit everyone if we do them correctly. Businesses owned by Blacks, Hispanics, Latinos represent about 31% of the businesses in the New Orleans metro, yet they receive only 1% of all revenue generated in the region. Less than 50% of both the Black and Hispanic Latino populations, respectively, are homeowners, compared to over 70% of the white population. These simple numbers are just representative of the size of the issue, the size of the problem that we see here in our region in terms of racial disparities related to the economy, each of those things build up in their own way to contributing to the wealth gap here in our region. And if you look at the wealth gap and you're working to solve it through these three issue areas, these three levers, then you intersect with each of those issue areas that we mentioned before, things like education, things like criminal justice and other such issues around affordable housing and things like that. So as we work to solve the wealth gap, many of these other things can be addressed along the way as contributing to that larger problem, again, through the levers of home ownership, wages and income, and business ownership. Clearly, these numbers suggest that there is a significant amount of work to be done. So to talk more about that, I want to welcome Nicole Jolly, the Vice President of Strategy and Engagement with the Urban League of Louisiana, to share more about Sea Change strategies.
Thank you so much, Lamar, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I am so excited to share more about what this process actually looks like. The Sea Change Collective is engaging in a planning process where we are taking the time to build out an intentional, informed, and actionable plan for increasing African American, Hispanic, and Latino income, business ownership, and home ownership. So we are focusing on, and some of these you've already heard mentioned this morning, we're focusing on 5 distinct but interrelated strategies to move the work forward. So the Sea Change Collective is partnering with Lamar and the team at the data center to review existing data and to collect new data where it does not exist. The work that the data center is doing will help paint the picture of what is really happening in our region related to income, home ownership, and business ownership, providing us with a solid foundation to build from. In addition to data, we also know that this work requires many individuals and organizations to work in partnership. The Sea Change Collective is bringing together organizations to collaboratively address the myriad of challenges and barriers associated with closing the racial wealth gap. The Urban League of Louisiana is serving as the backbone organization to this initiative. So we are coordinating and shepherding this effort, but the partnerships are key. The partnerships that you see today, like those with our steering committee members and other organizations in the region, are just some of the many that are required to see this vision through. The partnerships for Sea Change will cross the many different sectors that impact wealth creation. So there truly is a role for everyone in this effort. And to support that, we are beginning an extensive community engagement effort. No one of us has all of the answers, and no one of us fully understands the experiences related to home ownership, business ownership, and wages. So over the next several months, there will be a variety of ways for people from across the region to share their experiences, their stories, and their expertise in support of developing promising solutions. This will include surveys, interviews, focus groups, and listening sessions to ensure that the strategies developed are rooted in equity and directly address the actual needs of communities in the region. All of these efforts will lead to the creation of an implementation framework that spells out a set of strategies and partners responsible for implementing them to move the needle in closing the racial wealth gap. Learning from the data, from other efforts that have been successful, and from what is shared through the community engagement, we will collectively develop actionable strategies with measurable indicators to allow us and our partners to track progress. This is not a short-term initiative. Something like this obviously requires dedicated commitment for a long period of time. And so we will be preparing to track progress over time. And lastly, but certainly one of the most critical strategies that the Sea Change Collective will be developing is an awareness campaign to raise awareness of the initiative so that more stakeholders know about and can engage with us. But even more importantly, the campaign will help people understand the opportunity that exists for our entire region if we close the racial wealth gap. At the end of this planning period, we will move into a multi-year implementation phase that will be driven and informed by the data and research. So while we are all eager to begin taking action now, and we certainly feel the urgency of what is at stake, the steps being taken during this planning phase will put us in a much stronger path to see real change. So by documenting the state of wealth of African American, Hispanic, and Latinos in the region, by engaging stakeholders to inform and participate the effort, by creating a measurable action plan informed by the data and by what we know works, and lastly, by launching the campaign to change the narrative about the racial wealth gap, we will be in a position to change practices and policies together to dramatically change the future of our region.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for that great information and for all of your hard work on Sea Change. We are a creative crew here at the Urban League of Louisiana, and like all true creatives, we are always surveying the landscape for inspiration and best practices. In the area of closing the racial wealth gap, we were inspired by work being led by the Chicago Community Trust. After Krista Moore, Charles West, and I met with the Chicago Trust's Community Impact Team at their offices in February 2020, I knew immediately that we could benefit from their efforts and knowledge. Peggy Davis, Vice President of Community Impact, has this to say about the work of Sea Change.
It is important that this work spread across the country, right? Every major urban area has these issues, right? From decades of history of discriminatory and racist policies and practices that have prevented Black and brown people from achieving what they ought to be able to achieve, what everybody wants to achieve. And so it's important that every region think about the impact of this wealth gap on the economic viability of the city, of the people that live there, and think about how it could be better. This is how it can be better.
We are so grateful to Peggy, to Helene Gale, President and CEO of the Chicago Community Trust, and the entire Community Impact Team for their generous support and technical assistance for Sea Change. This is a collective impact initiative, which means together, partners in this work are learning, discussing, sharing, challenging assumptions, and bringing our perspectives forward to achieve a shared strategy to close the racial wealth gap. While the Urban League of Louisiana, as you heard, is proud to serve as the backbone, we are also very pleased to have Square Button Consulting as a project management team and thought partner on this journey. Thank you to Charles West, President of Square Button Consulting, Gabrielle Gunn, and Nashawn Johnson for being an important part of the Sea Change collective work. I'd also like to thank Claire Minson for her early contributions to this effort. There would be no collective without the leaders who have agreed to roll up their sleeves and do the planning work needed to build a successful framework to close the racial wealth gap. I am so pleased to acknowledge the members of the Sea Change Collective Steering Committee: Norman Barnum, Lamar Gardier, Leisha Gooseberry, Fred Johnson, Jan Moeller, Lindsay Navarro, Myra Pineda, John Renthrop, and Mike Scott. Let's hear what a few of them have to say about the Sea Change Collective.
My name is Norman Edward Barnum IV. I'm the interim president and CEO of the New Orleans Business Alliance, and we are the accredited economic development agency for the city of New Orleans. Our work is essential to create certainty in uncertain times for our investors, for our communities, for return for our African American community. Participation in the Sea Change Collective is important to me personally as an African American male in our country, in the United States. Understanding that capitalism and your role in capitalism, you have to be able to become part of the value proposition, and the value proposition is tied to your wealth and the equity in the system. And because African Americans have not had the type of equity position that they deserve based upon the work and the investment into our American culture, that's why it's important to me now, as a male, to express that and then to cement systemically our position and our equity proposition in our American society. Now, in my professional capacity as the interim president and CEO of the New Orleans Business Alliance, specifically as we deal in Orleans Parish and the role of the culture bearers in Orleans Parish that have created this cultural roux that we call New Orleans, to be able to share in it in an economic way that validates not only our role, but helps cement our role moving forward. That's why participation in the Sea Change Collective is utmost important to me, both personally and professionally. Participation from all individuals in this collective is about growth of the economy. Diversity, inclusion is not an exclusion to anybody. It's inclusion and validation and growth of the pie. And I think that is the most important part of this experiment that we're doing right now. Call it to question. Growth and incentivizing growth for all individuals has not happened in a systemic way that's been fair. And if we do walk down this path together, the opportunity and the probability to grow our economy in a way that satisfies the equity proposition for all stakeholders is greater. And that's why this collective in this moment is so important. The time is now, the moment is rich, and this collective and bringing people into the collective with us increases our probability of growth in our economy, both regionally and nationally.
Well, first of all, it's an honor to be invited to be part of this collective. This is such incredibly important work. And we're a part of this because we understand that you cannot move Louisiana forward unless you create an economy that works for everybody in Louisiana, where everybody has an opportunity to really share in our economic successes. And you can't do that unless you erase the racial wealth gap. We know that the racial wealth gap is not by accident. It's the result of hundreds of years of policies meant to disenfranchise and hold back people and communities of color. And this is an effort to bring folks together from different walks of life, from different lived experiences, different areas of expertise, to really come up with solutions and also create the momentum around finally solving these entrenched issues that have held so many people in Louisiana back. Our economy is not going to work unless it works for everybody. If we can lift up the people and communities who've been historically left behind, that is going to create a stronger economy for everybody. This is not a zero-sum game where if you help one group, you are hurting another. I think the collective here is not just Black and brown communities, but all of us working together, because if we erase these barriers, if we can see our way to addressing the historic inequities in Louisiana through policy change, then we can really build a stronger economy that works for everybody. We can realize the dreams that every family has for themselves and really realize the founding ideals of this country that we haven't lived up to historically. But I think most of us in the Sea Change Collective and most people truly believe in. And so I think I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't believe our best days were ahead. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't know that working together we can achieve the kind of change that New Orleans sorely needs, that Louisiana has needed for a long time. And I'm so proud to be part of the Sea Change Collective because I think this is the start of really making the kind of change that is long overdue.
My name is Lindsay Navarro, and I'm the founder and executive director of El Centro, a New Orleans-based nonprofit that provides financial literacy and entrepreneurial training in Spanish. The reason this work is so important around closing the racial wealth gap, I think oftentimes those who don't believe in the work they look at it as a pie. They have their piece, and they are afraid that that bridging that gap, right, is going to make their piece smaller. They don't realize that what it actually does is it makes the piece bigger. When people have more money, they can buy their homes, they can invest in their communities, they can invest in their schools, they become more comfortable with who they are and where they are, and that then creates the opportunity for them to be more involved in their own town. I think we'd see much more vibrancy, we'd see a lot less, we'd see definitely more happiness. And I think that we all want something better for our children and for our future. Who doesn't want a better future for their families, for their children, for their children's children, and for generations to come?
Thank you so much to our steering committee members. The Sea Change Collective has also named a national advisory committee whose members are charged with helping to elevate the work and connecting the collective to information, resources, and technical assistance. You've heard from one of our committee members, Peggy Davis with the Chicago Community Trust. We are also honored to have as members Mark Morial, Angela Glover Blackwell, Bill Bynum, Janae Queen Nazaire, Mitch Landrew, and Dr. Andrew Perry. Sea Change could not have gotten off the ground without the generous support of funders from the philanthropic and private sectors. I want to thank our funders for their investment in the Urban League of Louisiana and also in closing the racial wealth gap to create opportunity and prosperity for all people. We express our deepest gratitude to the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, the Greater New Orleans Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, the Chicago Community Trust, and the PepsiCo Foundation for your very generous support. Paula Hopkins, Senior Sales Director for Strategy with PepsiCo, has a few words to share on behalf of the PepsiCo Foundation.
Racial inequities are not random, and they were created and sustained over time. The benefits of closing the racial wealth gap extend well beyond simply being the right thing to do. Study after research study shows that when we close racial equity gaps, the overall economy benefit. It matters because when we get this right, the outcome will be that race will not determine one's socioeconomic status, and people can thrive no matter the color of their skin or the texture of their hair or where they live. Everyone will have the same level playing field. I'm excited because it's time for a new approach, and no one sector can solve it alone. I know Sea Change will help facilitate the integration of data-driven programs to help all Greater New Orleans people, business, and communities. When I think of solving the racial wealth gap, I think of it as a process where tools must be used to change policies, programs, and practices. The change I hope to see is for businesses and communities to come together to solve this for Greater New Orleans by breaking down barriers that impact lives. I'm excited for Sea Change Collective to support the efforts to deploy resources and yield tangible results.
Thank you so much, Paula. Partnership means everything to the Sea Change Collective, because what the pandemic has certainly taught us is that we are all in this together. Those who embrace this concept will thrive and achieve, and that's what the Sea Change Collective is looking to create. We want to call on now Myra Pineda, Chris Demore, Christy Slater, John Renthrope, and Jade Brown Russell to speak on the importance of partnership, investing in closing the racial wealth gap, and the commitment needed to create sustainable change. Good morning, Myra.
Good morning. What an exciting day. My name is Myra Pineda, and I'm the president and CEO of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Louisiana. We're the largest business organization and only chamber in the state of Louisiana, and our mission is to foster a favorable business environment for our members and for the business owners in the state. And how difficult is that when we're dealing with disparities and gaps? So when Judy invited us to be a part of this Sea Collective at that time without a name, it was an obvious yes that we had to join forces because this is an effort that we all have to come in and do it together. We can't do it alone. So we're proud and thrilled to join the Urban League and our steering committee partners and many others that will join along the way to work towards erasing the systemic disparities that prevent Black and Hispanic communities to access all opportunities and erase that gap, that racial gap that prevents generational wealth. It is at the core of our mission. We're committed to working and building a more equitable community. And we all know this is not possible unless we implement strategies that are intentional in attacking the root of these barriers. If there is a silver lining from the pandemic, it's that we have to work together, and it has been highlighted, the gaps have been highlighted in our communities. The same that our nonprofits have been working on for many, many years. But now it's past time, it's overdue, and we need to address for the common good and the true economic development of the great state of Louisiana. And starting with the greater New Orleans area, looking at what the root of the problem is and rolling up our sleeves together as a community to address these issues. So thank you very much for including us. We're honored to be a part of this collective and look forward to many years of hard work, but very well worth our while. Thank you.
Thank you, Myra. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris DeMoore. I'm honored to be here. I had the privilege and honor of serving as a board chair of the Urban League of Louisiana for 4 years. I currently serve on the executive committee, and I'm also a partner in the law firm and owner in the law firm of Adams and Reese, one of the larger law firms here in the Gulf South. I'm really excited about this opportunity because rarely do we have an opportunity to do the right thing and also get a huge return on investment. By closing the racial gap, we give everyone an opportunity to thrive economically. And in doing so, we have an opportunity to rake in $3 billion in the city of New Orleans. To do so, we need full commitment from the business community. At Adams and Reese, we're one of the largest law firms in the Gulf South. We are committed to closing the racial wealth gap. We work with the Urban League to ensure that this plan and the sea change will come to fruition. But I need my business community members to step it up. This is not a feel-good story. This is a real outcome-driven story where if the business community steps up and follows with the sea change and the data shows us, New Orleans can be the leader in economic driven activity. And we can be the leader, not only in a culturally diverse city, but an economically sustainable city where we have not only closed the wealth gap, but we have also done the right thing. So as a member of the business community, I strongly ask my fellow business folks to step up and join the sea change so that we can close this racial wealth gap and make a sustainable economic difference that is generational. And I guarantee you, if we follow the data and do what the sea change has done so, we will make an incredible difference, not only in the lives of the people of New Orleans and Louisiana, but also throughout the country. I'm very grateful to be a part of this. I guarantee you the folks involved in this will make this happen. And I strongly urge the business community to join us in this endeavor. I'm going to pass it off to one of my heroes, Christy Slater, who is with the Kellogg Foundation. Very grateful for what Christy has done. And Christy, I welcome your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words, Chris. Greetings, everyone. My name is Christy Slater. I'm a program officer with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. I'm a member of the U.S. Southern team, guide the foundation strategy in New Orleans, and lead the employment equity investments here as well. I just want to give you a quick word about the Kellogg Foundation. Our grant making supports thriving children, working families, and equitable communities. For WKKF, this means investing in early childhood education, health equity, and employment equity, all through a lens of what we call our DNA, racial equity and healing, community engagement, and leadership development. So having shared that background, it's clear to me how bold efforts like the Sea Change Collective aligns with many aspects of our programmatic focus. Certainly the support for working families component with emphasis on workforce and small business development. Beyond that, this program was formed with a racial equity lens and is guided by community leaders focused on the ultimate goal of closing the racial wealth gap in the greater New Orleans region. So why is that important? Well, in 2018, the foundation released the Business Case for Racial Equity report for New Orleans and Louisiana. Judy and Chris talked about what this means for New Orleans, but beyond that, the report says the greater New Orleans area can realize a $43 billion gain in economic output by the year 2050 if we can close the racial equity gap. And that's not all. It could also mean that there would be 5.5 billion a year in new purchasing power. Now, I want to acknowledge that this report was produced before the world turned upside down and then was hit by a hurricane. So the dollar amounts may need to be adjusted, but the importance of this focus remains the same. So what does closing the racial equity gap look like, and why is that significant? Well, as Judy stated earlier, by 2050, more than half the population, workforce, and consumers here in New Orleans will be people of color. And I want to emphasize a point that was shared by Judy in the opening, that closing the racial equity gap means lessening and ultimately eliminating disparities and opportunity differentials that limit the potential and economic contributions of people of color. It means giving all groups the same opportunity for good health, education, employment, and wealth. Imagine what that would mean for the greater New Orleans area, what that would mean for our families, and what that would mean to our children and their futures. The Kellogg Foundation made a significant investment in the Sea Change Collective to help give this bold vision a chance. We hope that this collective focus on income, business ownership, and home ownership will lead to systemic changes and solutions that are accessible and ultimately achievable for Black and brown communities in this region. This effort will be successful when Black and brown communities see positive change in how they interact with these systems. Are they able to increase their incomes, see their businesses thrive, achieve home ownership? Is the wealth gap closing? When the answer to all of those questions is yes, then that is the change we all want to see. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Renthrope. Christy, Chris, and Myra, thank you for your words. I'm going to kind of piggyback off a lot of the things you mentioned. I'm a CEO. I'm a brewmaster by trade of Cajun Fire Brewing Company. We happen to be the second longest operating Black-owned manufacturing company in North American history. I'm also a serial entrepreneur. I'm the COO of New Orleans East Cultural Hub. I have a lot of skin in the game as far as my investments to the New Orleans community. I'm second generation New Orleanian. My family is from the Bayou Country. And when I looked at the opportunities, Judy, I was so happy for her to introduce this collective to me because it's very much rooted in my self-determination as well as our purpose in a lot of the companies I operate. We're about socioeconomic gains in a city like New Orleans that has so many contributions that Black Americans have contributed that the world has taken advantage of. One being jazz, food cultures, you name it. We need to see some kind of equitable output. Hopefully in my lifetime, my children, we're looking at generational wealth. As a Black entrepreneur, this is the legacy that I want to leave behind. So when it became an opportunity for me to take advantage of having a position on this wonderful collective, it was a no-brainer that I would serve and put my efforts in and also offer my experiences as a Black entrepreneur in this landscape. I guess my take on being an entrepreneur is being exposed to the audacity, right? The audacity that you want to create generational wealth, the audacity that you want to change policy to be more equitable, the audacity that you want to inspire others to engage entrepreneurship to increase the quality of life. In an area that's been ravaged by Hurricane Katrina and now Hurricane Ida, this is the landscape that I've grown my professional career in. So with Sea Change Collective, hopefully this will be a foundational pillar where we can engage those equitable resources, make a society and that will increase the quality of life, particularly in the New Orleans East region, and ultimately be something that can be used as a model. If you want to get things done specifically in the state of Louisiana, normally New Orleans is where the innovation starts. So at that origin, I'm looking forward to the opportunities that Sea Change Collective can bring, and I'm definitely thankful for the opportunity to serve and everyone that's participating on the call and watching to to bear witness to something that I think will definitely aid in our success as a city.
Thank you so much, John, for those comments. We are going to continue on. Unfortunately, Jay Brown Russell is not able to be with us. A conflict came up for her. Jade serves as the chair of the Urban League of Louisiana Board of Directors, and I know that she was going to share on behalf of the board the Urban League's commitment to this work. So we miss you, Jade, but we know of your support and the support of the entire board of the Urban League of Louisiana. As we bring this exciting announcement to a close, I want you to know how important it is that we hear from you. We want to know about the change that you want to see, and we want to get your thoughts about closing the racial wealth gap. As you heard earlier, we've created several ways that you can share your voice and your ideas with us, whether it's a community survey, being part of a focus group, a listening session, or participating in a town hall. We want to hear from you. We've said to you, we cannot do this without you. We don't want to do this without you. We need your vision. We need your expertise. We need your commitment to change, and we urge you to participate and to spread the word about the Sea Change Collective. So please be sure that you are on the Urban League's email list and that you are following us on social media to get all of the details about how to join in. I want to thank the Urban League team for making today's announcement possible: Nicole Jolly, Ginger LeBlanc, and Jonathan Barnes, and a special thanks to J.R. Thomason with VPJR. To close us out today, we want to hear from a few more of our Sea Change Collective Steering Committee members who want to share with you the change that they would like to see. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for being with us for this important announcement, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
My name is Fred Johnson. My organization is the New Orleans Neighborhood Development Foundation, and we teach and train first-time home buyers how to become homeowners so that they may build assets to pass on to their children. And we've been at this for 35 years. Change is possible, and let me just say, I like the name of this committee, Sea Change, because what Black and brown people is in need of is a sea change. Not a river change, not a bayou change, but a sea change, because every aspect of our life we are discriminated against. In everything you could touch, think, try to appreciate or understand, when you peel it back, there is a serious level of discrimination. No fault of ours, but that's how it was created, set up, and designed, so that somebody's going to be on the top and somebody's going to be on the bottom. And heretofore, Black and brown people are at the bottom, and poor white people are at the bottom too, but they don't know it. But sea change grabs you. It's all inclusive. It's all encompassing, because what's needed in America is sea change.
I do believe that in order for the African American community and Latinos to see the change they want to see, they have to work together. We have to come together as a team to make change, to raise our voices and to be louder about the change that we want to see. I think a lot of times we work in silos and then we begin to compete with one another. And I think the first thing that we have to realize is that we can't look at one another as competitors. We have to leverage one another's stories and the reality of each other's challenges. I believe change is possible. I believe all things are possible. I think it takes dedication. It takes a team to come together. It takes ideating. It takes creating a strategy. And then it takes focus to execute that strategy. And then flexibility to be willing to, when you're facing those barriers, to be willing to navigate around them and find more creative solutions.
So when I look across the country at other efforts similar to Sea Change, the first thing that stands out is that there are very few of them, right? More in recent years that people have started to gain awareness of things like systemic inequity and the kind of work that's required to really move our country forward in a broad-based way where there's great prosperity for all. There's more efforts, right? But still few to match what we're doing with Sea Change. And that's in part because Sea Change is thinking broadly in terms of working across municipal lines, across demographic lines, across class lines, across social lines, such that we're all working together. But also we're thinking long-term, that this is not a thing where we can put in a year or 3 years or 5 good years and get something major done. We know that this work is going to have to happen over a long period of time, over decades, perhaps. And that is how you make real change happen. The issues that we see in our region did not start overnight. They didn't even happen this way over a single generation or two. It's been multiple generations. And we can pull ourselves out of where we happen to be right now in terms of a stagnating economy and groups that are not able to perform well. But it does take this kind of long-term thinking and long-term will and leadership. And that's what we see with Sea Change. And that's rather unique in terms of programs that we see across the country. And many are more focused short-term. Many understand that the moment has arrived around equity and are trying to do something in that moment, right? But are maybe not built to last long term. Sea Change's effort is one that intends on being around for a long time. And that's what's required, not short-term thinking, long-term thinking. And for that reason, I know that there's going to be a lot of success in this program.